finish the book that you have, and if you don't have the new one, please let us know, we'll give you that. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and I've enjoyed reading it, studying it, and I think it applies to our class, to us. And let me finish that before I put it all on us. The title is, How is Godly Wisdom Revealed Through Love? And I want to read the chapter. Now about food sacrifice, and this is 1 Corinthians 8, chapter 8. Now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs us up, but love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know, but the man who loves God is known by God. So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came, and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came, and through whom we live. But not everyone knows this. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that they eat such food they think of it as having been sacrificed to an idol. And since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of our freedom does not become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone with a weak conscience sees you who have this knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't he be emboldened to eat what has been sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother, for whom Christ died, is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against your brothers in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause him to fall. Now, are any of us, how many of you have eaten food that have been sacrificed to idols? Not knowingly. Well, I got to thinking about that as I picked up the book and started reading. We're talking about sacrificing idols. Well, Christianity is an unselfish religion. It is not self-centered, but is other-centered. It flows out of the infinite unselfishness of Jesus Christ. Those who profess to follow him must be of the same mind. Now, Jesus taught that greatness in God's kingdom is determined by how many people we serve, not by how many serve us. And so what I want us to do is to look at what we're doing to others, not doing to them, but how we affect others. The central truth of the lesson is that concern for the welfare of other believers leads us to refrain from actions that are not inherently wrong, but may lead others to sin. How many of us have seen, and maybe it was just me, there was a lawyer that I used to deal with, and he would talk about Christianity and going to church and all of this. And then we'd get in a group and it didn't reflect that. What was that impression on someone who was not a Christian?
Very poor witnessing.
Yeah. Now, what did it do to me?
Yeah.
I sinned too, because then I turned him off. So we're talking about how we are to adjust with that kind of a situation. Paul dealt with the problem of whether or not a Christian should eat meat, of animals slain as pagan sacrifices. He set forth principles applicable to questions concerning Christian conduct. How many of us concern ourselves with our conduct and how that affects people that see us? how does this apply today? How many of us have ever had to make a decision, this was in my lesson, about eating meat that was sacrificed to an idol? Janie buys our meat. I'm assuming it comes from the store, and they get it from somewhere, but I don't think it was probably ever sacrificed.
No.
Oh, we need to be aware of the impact our actions may have on those Christians who may observe us. I think this lesson is more talking to us and dealing with other Christians. Christians who may not be as committed or have been Christians for as long. And we may run into new Christians. Well, let's look at these verses. Now, about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. The man who thinks he knows something does not yet know as he ought to know. But the man who loves God is known by God. Why I am a Christian? I've been set free by Christ. I can do anything I want to as long as I consider it all right. Is that where we are? I'm a Christian. Christ has saved me. So I can do anything I want, right?
This lesson is about our influence, whether we think we're influencing anybody or not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so some of the things that we do, which are okay for us, may be a bad influence on those who observe us and what we're doing. Do you ever have that attitude? Do we ever have the attitude we can do anything we want? Yeah. And I'm talking about myself. None of y'all are that way.
Yeah.
But, you know, we many times center our attention on ourselves and forget about our responsibility towards others. The Corinthians had this problem, and it surfaced in a variety of ways. The basic question was whether a Christian should eat food that had been offered in sacrifice to idols. Now it's interesting when we look at some of these verses that deal with what was going on when Paul was there. And then we have to turn it into ourselves and see how it affects us. The second question they were concerned with was whether a Christian had the freedom to eat sacrificial meat in an idol's temple. Now, I don't think I've been to an idol temple, and so I haven't had that problem. How did this come about? And looking at in addition to the temple at Aphrodite, in the city of Corinth itself, there were temples to other pagan deities. In all of these temples, animal sacrifices were made. Only certain parts of the body were used in the sacrifices. A certain portion was given to the priests, and other portions might be eaten in a ritual meal in the temple. The remainder was sold to the butcher shops, and in turn sold to the public. And that's where this comes about. If you look at how the food got out, even though they were not going to the temple and they were not eating there, the food was coming through the butchers, and they would go and purchase it and they would eat it. In effect, these temples were the slaughterhouses whence came much of the meat sold to the public. Since the best animals were sacrificed, the best meat in the marketplace usually came from a pagan temple. It kind of gives us an understanding of the scripture verse and what was going on at the time and what Paul was talking about, but we have to be able to fit that into how it affects us. We have mentioned above the concerns that the Corinthians had about eating meat sacrificed to idols. We think there may have been two groups mentioned as weak. Number one, Jews who had become Christians but were troubled about eating meat sacrificed to idols. Now, where is their growth? Has their growth gotten to the point that it doesn't matter if they are eating this meat that had been sacrificed to the idols? Janie brings it home and puts it on the plate. I know Janie's a Christian, so she says I can eat it. But that was where some Jew had become a Christian and now knew that this meat had been sacrificed to idols. And so was it okay for him to eat it?
But you know, they knew where it came from.
Mhm.
We
They-
have no idea where it came from.
But he knows where it came from, but he also knows that he's now been saved. Can he eat the meat?
In the privacy of his own home,
Why on the privacy of his own home?
because he would not be affecting another young
Yeah,
Christian.
this is where it is. But now, what about, it said, Jews who became Christians but were troubled about eating meat sacrificed to idols. Should they have been troubled about eating it? Because it had been sacrificed to idols.
You know, Bill, everything you're saying is leading up to one word, witnessing. Witnessing.
Now you've got my whole list.
It
No,
just, it is
but you're
so-
right.
Yeah,
But what about the time that he's by himself eating
yeah,
and knows that it was sacrificed?
yeah.
And he's a Christian and it's okay for him to eat. But what if he thinks it's bad to eat it?
Nobody's around.
Nobody's around. Has he grown enough to know that he can eat it? That was one of the situations. The other group are those who were former pagans who had once participated in pagan sacrifices and had not learned to separate eating this meat from the idea of pagan worship.
And you know, Bill, what's really a slap in the face is Paul is writing this letter to the church in Corinth. So
Yes.
he's talking to the churchgoers.
He's talking to
Christians.
the Christians.
Yeah,
He is. That's the reason that, you know, he's making us look at that there's two levels there. We find the other group in which Paul considered himself, the group that had knowledge and did not consider eating this meat as being pagan worship. Okay, so for me it's okay. But Fred over there is a new Christian. And what I'm doing is okay for me, and I know that it's okay, but Fred thinks it's wrong. What should I do? Not eat it. Yeah. This phase includes all the Christian Corinthians. They knew that eating the meat was not a form of worship of the idols, and that such was hollow and meant nothing. Paul admits that Christians have this knowledge, but the problem cannot be solved by knowledge alone. So the problem is not that I know that I can eat that. The problem then becomes what?
Influence.
The witness. The witness. Knowledge puffed up. This is apparently aimed at those who felt free to eat meat offered to idols. Thus they looked down on weak Christians, not weak in faith, but in understanding their freedom in Christ. What was needed here was Christian what? Love. Knowledge was puffed up. They looked down on weak Christians, not weak in faith, but in understanding their freedom in Christ. Do we ever look down upon a new Christian? Do we ever think, you know, and that's the reason I mentioned that we've been around a while. A few years,
yeah.
and been Christians for a while. But what about that grandchild, or that child, or that new Christian that we run into in the church? How should our attitude be towards that? Isn't that what Paul's talking about? Love is more important than knowledge. I know that I can eat it, but I need to know what me eating it in front of someone would do to that person, the witness that that person sees, that I'm doing. It kind of adds a little bit more to our faith, doesn't it? Love is more important than knowledge. Knowledge can make us feel good, look good, and feel important, but we can all too easily develop an arrogant, know-it-all attitude. Many people with strong opinions are unwilling to listen to and learn from God and others. We can obtain God's knowledge only by loving Him. Now, do we ever find a situation where we disagree with some interpretation in the Bible? Not how we're saved, but some of the other issues. Do we ever disagree on that?
Sure.
And how do we address that other person? With love. That's it. One of the things, and I know I've mentioned this before, but one of the things that I wasn't sure I did right. When I started doing mediations full time, the Florida Baptist Convention, we were in Florida, had a course on mediating churches. Can you imagine mediating a church? I did.
It sounds easy.
It's very easy. The first one I did, the church had said that they wanted to get rid of the pastor. You know, this is not the right pastor for us. So I go down and I meet with the deacons first, and then I meet with the pastor. Well, we know he's not the right person. We've got to get rid of him. God has told us that he's the wrong man. Oh boy, this is going to be easy. All I got to do is go in there, Pastor, where are you going to go? So I go in and talk to the pastor. Well, I have prayed about this, and God has told me that I'm to stay here. I'm not going to tell you what the rest of the church, what happened to that one, but that was, but do we ever run into that? Where we disagree with interpretations? Look around at the conventions, not just the Southern Baptist Convention, but now the Methodists are having problems.
Bill, I've got a note here in my book that says, don't be a religious critic.
Yeah.
That's good.
Don't be a religious critic.
But now, can we disagree without being disagreeable and love that other person?
Yeah, yes.
Is it easy?
Yeah.
No, it's not. And I think that's probably what Paul's talking about here. It is, but we've got to understand that when we disagree with that other person, we still have to do what to it?
Love
We
it.
have to love him. We find in 1 John 4:7-6, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. And whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love." Now verses 4-9. So then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things come, and for whom we live, and there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom we live. Jesus Christ, through whom all things come, and through whom we live. But no, not everyone knows this. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat such food, they think it is having been sacrificed to an idol, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of our freedom does not become a stumbling block to the weak. Do you think this chapter is dealing with how we are, what we do, or is it how we love those people that we deal with?
Our
I think
witness.
that's actually both.
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. It's the same. But it's a lot to this witness that we give. And how can we witness to someone who disagrees with us without loving them? Isn't that difficult?
Mhm.
Paul addressed these words to believers who weren't bothered by eating meat that had been sacrificed to idols. Although idols were phony and pagan, The pagan ritual of sacrificing them was meaningless. Eating such meat offended Christians with more sensitive consciences. Paul said that if a weaker or less mature believer misunderstood their actions, they should, out of consideration, avoid eating meat offered to idols. So if that person that I'm talking to doesn't have that same belief and hasn't matured enough, then we need to love them and deal with it. Does that mean we can say, you're right?
Doesn't require that.
It doesn't require that, does it? But how do we deal with it? How do you deal with that person that disagrees in some some issue within the scripture that you disagree with? And I'm not going to ask how it, we had in our church when I was in Tallahassee an issue of whether we were going to have women deacons. And there were a number of folks that said no, and there were a number of folks who said yes. And it caused a problem. Now, how do you deal with an issue like that?
You still have the scars to show.
Huh?
You still have the scars.
Oh, I was redheaded when I did
Yeah, I
that.
know. He was the chairman.
And yet there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things come and from whom we live, and there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came, and through whom we live. The point of this verse, verse 6, is to reinforce Paul's denial of the deity of the so-called gods. Since they were not deity, they really could not be worshipped as such. This was the view of those who had knowledge or a right understanding of eating meat sacrificed to idols. Okay, they're right. What they've done, they're right. Now, but not everyone knows this. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat such food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to an idol, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. Now, do you just say, I love you, and go on about your business? Or can you talk to them about these issues that you have? And how do you do that talking?
With love.
Well, you do it with love, but can you say, I disagree with you, but, and this is why I disagree with you, but I still love you, and if that's the way you believe it, then go forward. Is that a way to deal with that? Or do you say, nope, you're wrong, you better straighten up?
You won't change anybody's mind by saying that.
No, you're not. No, when you tell them they're wrong, that's, no, I'm not wrong. Some Christians still saw eating meat sacrificed as pagan worship, so you did have those people. In the case of the weak Christians, their conscience said, do right. They thought they were doing right. Their moral judgment told them that eating meat offered to idols was pagan worship. If they ate it, they violated their conscience by doing what their moral judgment told them was wrong. But if you think it's wrong, then is it wrong for you to do it? If you, as the Christian, think something is wrong, should you do it? No. And there's where the conflict comes. I don't think it's wrong, but you think it's wrong. Then what do I do? What impression am I making on you by doing what I'm doing that you think is wrong? Haven't I tried to influence that person? But we have to be very careful at how we influence them, don't we? We can talk about the truth of the issue, but we have to do it with a sense of love of that other person.
Another word comes into play there, respect.
Respect, absolutely.
Show respect for others.
We have to show respect for the others.
You know, we have in our daily lives, we encounter a lot of people that are doing tough jobs. Some of these are menial jobs, but a lot of places of business are very short-handed now.
Yeah.
And the people that are working, in some cases, have more than a normal workload.
Yeah.
And they're under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure. I saw this a while back at the airport. Go to the airport and look at some of the people checking you through security and the
Yeah.
stresses they're under.
Yeah.
And it's really tough. But if we can show kindness and respect to people, everywhere we go, we have opportunities every day.
Yeah.
It means a lot to people, I think.
It does. Yeah.
You know, I don't want to steal your thunder, and this may be your last line, but, you know, I've heard this lesson before, and I'm sure everybody else has, but the one thing that hits me is, that I've always remembered, you're the only sermon some people will ever see.
Yeah.
Good
That's
point,
right.
very good point.
You're
That's
right.
exactly
That's
right. You're the only sermon
That's
that
right.
some people ever hear.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah. So they're looking to you.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's look at, we're running, but
You're
food,
okay.
pardon?
You're okay.
Oh, okay, thank you. See how we get along.
Yes, dear.
But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. And verse 9 says, and I think this is the key, be careful, however, that the exercise of our freedom does not become a stumbling block to the weak. If this is the only sermon they ever hear, if this is the only time they ever hear, we don't want that to be a stumbling block. We want to show that we care for them and that we love them and that we're Christians. If we're Christians, then are we not to be that way? Well, I think that you've seen the other lesson, the other verses. The key, the issue is whether our actions will lead others to do something that they consider to be sin. If it does, then we must refrain from that action, and otherwise we sin against Christ and ruin our weaker brother. And I ended this with three issues. Number one, what is safe for one man may be quite unsafe for another. The person we're dealing with's Christian walk may not have been going on that long, but they become a Christian. And we have to be careful when we deal with them. We must not only we must think not only of its effect on us, but it's on the effect of others. And the second, nothing ought to be judged solely from the point of view of knowledge. Everything we ought to be judged from the point of view of love. I've read my Bible all my life, and I've been a Christian since I was 8 years old. Now, you listen to me.
I know.
It didn't affect you much, did it? Nothing ought to be judged solely from the point of view of knowledge. Everything ought to be judged from the point of view of love. Our conduct should always be guided not by the thought of our own superior knowledge, but by sympathetic and considerate love for the other fellow. How many times have we found that person that we disagreed with, talked with them, and found out, well, they're right? Have we ever been wrong? I have.
Yeah.
All this leads to the greatest truth of all. No man has any right to claim a right, to indulge in a pleasure, to demand a liberty which may be the ruination of someone else. Some actions may be perfectly all right for us to do, but may harm a Christian brother or sister who is still young in the faith and learning what Christian life is all about. And then I thought, I think this lesson really has relevance for our class, faithful friends here at Roswell First Baptist Church. We are clearly a senior class. What we need to be aware of is that there are many younger Christians, not only in this church but in other places, that may actually observe how we act and how we respond to issues within the church and within our lives. So we need to be aware that we are witnesses and we need to show that we love. Anything else? David?
I had a unique opportunity about 7 or 8 years ago when I was working at Chick-fil-A as a consultant for a couple of years. And there's a lot, and if you know a lot about IT, that kind of thing, there are a lot of Indian.
Can we hear you a little
A
bit?
little bit
Yes,
louder.
so, unique experience about 7 or 8 years ago when I was working as a consultant at Chick-fil-A. And if you know a lot about IT, you know there's a lot of Indian natives in India, the country, that work in the IT field. And we were at lunch one day, and they weren't, at the cafeteria, they weren't serving something that the Indians could eat because, you know, in Hindu culture, religion, that kind of thing, they venerate cows as a sacred animal. They don't worship cows, but they do hold them as sacred. So one of the people, or two of the people in the group, got some Jell-O. Whipped cream on top, and it's like, oh, I'll just eat this. And so I had the opportunity to tell them that, you know, you may not want to do that because the gelatin that's made with it comes from a cow.
That's right.
Or pig or whatever. So I said, look up gelatin, and so they were very appreciative. It wasn't exactly the same situation where it was weakness of a younger Christian or that kind of thing, but it was, you know, in a similar vein to be able to
help
at
somebody
least
else.
witness that I cared about them. But it was just kind of unique that kind of goes with the thing here, and they were
Yes.
very appreciative of that, and let me know a couple of times that day, that, you know, where it had no matter to me or my faith at all. It did to them, so.
But you cared for their faith.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Respect.
Respect, yeah. Anything else? Thank you. Okay. Well, we're starting the new book next week. Wallace said he's ready.
Ready,
Ready to go.
ready.
So we're ready, starting new. Okay. Let's close. Father, thank you so much for your love for each of us. And have us love others as we deal in situations where we are witnesses, that we look to the other person with love and follow you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.